Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our 3-hour presentation entitled The Joy of Living for God, Life Lessons from Swami Kriyananda. And our presenter is residing in Palo Alto, California, the Ananda community there. She is online, and you'll get to meet her very soon. Her name is Nayaswami Asha. So thank you for being with us. It's earlier there in California, but we say good morning to all. There's at least one name or more people who are already in with us and don't know the names, so I don't know what part of the world you may be in. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all. Welcome. Just a few things technically. We do ask for now, especially, that we keep our mics muted. And if you forget, we have our engineer behind the scenes, and we'll be able to do that for you. Very soon, you can also open your cameras, and we get to see your smiling faces. So Asha will guide us through many things, even the things of that nature, to remind us throughout these 3 hours. But right now, I really just want to turn this over to Nayaswami Asha. Oh, my name, I haven't introduced myself. I am Nayaswami Supriya, and I do reside here with the Dallas community for 27 years. We have had a community here in Texas. So now let's turn it over to Asha. Welcome, and thank you so much for coming to be with us.
Well, thank you, Supriya. Supriya and I were remembering being at her breakfast table, which is, I hope, something that actually was planned. I was going to be physically there last May. This year has just turned out to be a year that none of us have expected. I think I must have been, I'm sure I was in Dallas, in Texas, more than 30 years ago. So I've really seen the development of the Ananda group there since before it was a group. I was there with Swamiji in Houston, like it must have been 35 years ago, really long time ago. And I was born in Texas, lived there for 15 years. So let's say I have a special link with all of you there. But now we're all living in a global village, so this is what really counts. And we're living in a world even beyond time and space at this point. So here we are. So I'd like to start with a prayer, and then Supriya will do a little chanting. And then after that, I'll give you some idea of how we're going to go forward for this morning. Okay, let's pray together. I'll pray without leaving you time to respond, because it's easier this way, but in your hearts, please pray with me. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dear Divine Friend Swami Kriyananda, we open our hearts, we bow at your feet. Be with us in this gathering, that we feel your living presence. Enlighten our hearts and minds, that through the example of Swami Kriyananda's life, we can realize our own potential and see in the way he lived a blueprint for how we may live. Make vivid your footprints in the sand, that as we take the walk from delusion to enlightenment, we walk with confidence, with certainty, and with the joy of your company, guiding and blessing us every step of the way. Om, peace. Amen. Supriya, if you'd be kind enough to chant, that would be lovely, and then we'll just have a moment of silence after that.
So let's sit dynamically with the eyes closed, and gazing through that spiritual eye center. Beautiful chant. Thou art my life. Thou art my love. Thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Over and over again from the heart. Excuse me, I need to click one audio button. All right, thank you. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought my mind love brought, in the thought my mind love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let go. He knows whom you let go. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do seek. In the thought my mind love brought, in the thought my mind love brought, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows when you let go. He knows when you let go. Thou art my life, how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let go. He knows whom you let go. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do see. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do see. In the thought by mine of heart, in the thought by mine of heart, I taste thy name, so sweet, so sweet. Devotee knows how sweet you are. Devotee knows how sweet you are. He knows whom you let go. 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 Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do see. Thou art my life, thou art my love, thou art the sweetness which I do see. Thou art the sweetness which I do see. Thou art the sweetness which I do see.
And let's feel the energy of that wonderful musical affirmation. And also during this meditation, let's pray together that we be inspired and guided, that the masters come to us and awaken a deeper understanding within us. Our focus is Swami Kriyananda's life of discipleship as an example of the joy of living for God. As we sit silently for a moment, consider if there are particular questions or subjects or something that you would really like to have answered, that you can either hold in your heart to be communicated silently or raise as the verbal question. Something you would really like to understand more deeply, that we may work together for the benefit of all of us. Now let us feel the silence for a moment or two. Peace. Amen. Okay, everyone. I'm going to just, let's see where I just was going to do a quick spin here and see what we have. Excellent. All right, everyone. Can you not hear me? Is my voice loud enough now? Mark, can you make me louder? Or do I have to make myself louder? Tell me which is going to work. Supriya, you're my canary in the cage. Whenever you can't hear me, you have to go like that. Because I have the habit of having the microphone an inch from my mouth, which allows me to be quite lazy about how I express myself. Dear ones, if you want to keep your camera open, or at least occasionally, I would enjoy seeing your faces. I recognize that in a long session, it's relaxing for you not to be on camera. I'm exactly the same. I always find a moment. I hope the video will fail so that I'll have to turn my camera off. But if you would be kind enough to turn your cameras on for the moment, since I can just see who's here. And yes, we can all wave and greet each other. And then afterwards, do whatever you prefer. I'm quite sympathetic. Hi, Sam. Hi, everyone. Very, very nice to see you. Fabulous. Okay, folks, here's the story for today. When we talked about the first concept was just how can we spend a little more time together after doing Sunday services that are a little formal and we don't have enough time. The idea was let's be together more. I suggested, or somebody else suggested, the concept of the book I wrote about Swamiji would be a focus for 3 hours. But what we're really talking about, I mean, the way we wanted to focus it exactly is the joy of living for God, which sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So the joy we're talking about is not necessarily that every moment is terrific, but it's a lot better than it was before we found the spiritual path. I don't think I have any argument from anyone on that one, because at least now, when we're miserable, we know why. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but there it is. Swamiji was in a conversation with this woman in India. She was lamenting a tremendous number of difficulties she had in her life. Swami kept trying to say to her, but at least you have a guru, you know that you're going toward enlightenment, that the guru is helping you. And she would say repeatedly, yes, but, and then go on to a long justification about why she was still unhappy. Finally, Swami just blessed her and stopped trying to explain. So that's what we're talking about, that we're not going to be spared, but how are we going to function? I like to be informal. Zoom is crazy. It's better than nothing, but it's a little crazy. I'll stop every so often and just invite questions or thoughts or something you really want me to talk about. I have a few pieces of paper here of things that were sent to me in advance. If someone has a particular subject or area that you just, not a long question, but just a kind of something you'd like me to talk about, I mean, the best thing I can think of is that you'll just raise your hand like that and I'll call on you as if we were in a school class, because that's the best way I can do it. And if I'm not able to stop immediately and take your question, I'll do it in a minute. The only other thing you need to know is an old friend is passing through town, and somewhere around 10 o'clock, they're going to be standing on our porch. And I'm going to run downstairs and I'm going to greet them for just a minute. If everything coincides, it'll be during our chanting break anyway, but I may have to walk away for a minute. I just wanted to warn you. I'm not going to have a long visit. Hello, Susan. Oh, nice to see you. Okay, everyone. Now that's the spirit. Just sit back in your lazy boy chair and enjoy the day. That's exactly right. Okay. So, does anyone have anything they particularly want me to address that I haven't received already in an email? If you do, please tell me. Okay. You will have another chance. This is not your forever hold your peace. This is just whatever you like. Okay. Yes, Supriya.
I'll just toss in that people, if they would choose, they could also put a question in the chat box, and we will retrieve those occasionally when it's appropriate and pass them on to Nayaswami Asha. And you can have it under your name, or you can do it to us privately if you want the question to be private. So let's just really enjoy this 3 hours together.
All right. All of you know, I think I'm going to hold it up. It takes two hands to lift it, but here's, look. Oops, there you go. Light Barrett. Yes, there you have it. Which is the, this is what allows me to die happy, the fact that I've written this book. 45 years of association with Swamiji, year by year, 220,000 words. Everything about the book came out perfectly, except unfortunately the index. I hired a professional indexer who did a terrible job, because the only way you can find anything in the index is if you already know what's in the book. I'm going to start here because it's a weird thought. One of the questions that I got from from someone was, how did things that Swamiji said over the years affect my life? It's interesting because at some point, like sometime in the last, probably in the first 15 years I knew Swamiji, he made a comment about indexes and what was a good index and what was a bad index. I mean, of all the things he ever said to me, I always remembered it. He said, you want an index where you can think of a word and find it in the index. That's just such an obvious statement. Why did I remember that? Because I paid a lot of money to someone to create an index in which you think of a word and you can never find it in the book. So it's just awful. If, when I reprint it, I'll just have to get someone to do it over again. However, so I feel like I have to apologize to everyone. But other than that, so here's the dilemma that I face. And I've had to think this through for many years, and I have to think it through even more now. I am kind of a one-tune singer. I know one song, and my one song is, I learned a lot from Swamiji, and I have felt literally ever since I met him, that I was meant to be a conduit and not just a box. And so I've always talked about what I've learned from Swamiji, what Swamiji has said, what I think he meant. I mean, I go back in my own files, class notes, back to 1970, 71, 72. And I find it's the same theme. It was a particular job. I can think of it either from the positive side, that the obvious positive side, or that I had some serious karma to balance here. But whatever it is, the longer I live, the more extreme it gets. Sometimes people say, but Master is the Guru. Why are you not talking about Master? Well, I do, of course. I recently gave, and I'm still in the middle of giving a very long series in the mornings about all our gurus. But I understand discipleship because Swami Kriyananda was a disciple. And if there's one word that defines him, that word is disciple. In fact, that was a serious contender for the title of the book. Just simply was the word disciple, except many disciples of Christ define themselves that way. So in the end, it didn't seem unique for what we were trying to say. But being a disciple, whether you have been initiated or accepted this line of gurus as your path to God or not, discipleship is everybody's path to God. And by that, I don't just mean eventually you have to have a guru, although Sanatan Dharma says that we do, but that's not the point. The point is we have to be receptive, humble, willing to learn, courageous in the face of obstacles, because we have faith that our lives are being directed from a higher, wiser source. And that's what it is to be a disciple. When you have a guru or you are a disciple of, that comes, interestingly, that comes afterwards. In Autobiography of a Yogi, the first line of Autobiography of a Yogi is the characteristic feature of Indian culture has always been the search for eternal verities, and the concomitant, and everyone always says guru-disciple relationship, but it actually says disciple-guru relationship, because the guru is always there, but it only matters if there is a disciple to receive it. So even if one is still in the mystery state as to what the name of one's guru might be, or already has that issue decided, the guru is like, it's an unmoving, fixed, infinite reality of unconditional love and light. The variable in the equation is not the guru. The variable in the equation is the disciple. And the difficulty with the spiritual path is that all true teaching is individual. And this is a chapter in Swamiji's autobiography, The Path, where he talks about, to each person, Master said something uniquely suited for their reality. This doesn't mean that there are no underlying truths. The North Star always leads us toward, in the right direction. And the North Star is always sitting there, the pole star. When people ask me, who Swami is to me, pole star is the best word that I can think of, because it's a fixed point of reference around which everything else revolves. But where we are in relation to that pole star, whether north, south, east, or west, and how far, and whether it's oceans or mountains or griffins or dragons or icy crevasses between us and that pole star, is what the answer is, when we ask the question how to move the distance. So that's why all teaching is individual. So when we end up, as all of us, or as most of us are now, where the pole star itself no longer has a physical body, it doesn't mean that the pole star ceased to be visible in the sky or accessible through the spiritual eye or through the heart or through the desperate prayer. Pole star is still, the guru is unchanging. Nothing changes the guru. He's the absolute fixed reality in the world. But if he's not speaking, if you're not in the room with him and he's not speaking to you directly, then the written words guide us, but cannot be relied upon without intuition because it's too easy to interpret and we don't always know what applies to us. A friend of mine at Ananda, at a certain point, became enamored of the teaching of celibacy and devoted himself to his psychological detriment to trying to follow that principle. And when I talked to him many years later to ask him how I got so confused, he explained it to me. And he said, "How did you deal with that?" And I laughed and I said, I did have a period of renunciation, but I was also married for many years. I looked at him and I said, it never occurred to me that that teaching applied to me. That's the only thing I can say. Yes, it was there. It was in black and white. But not once did I think that it was a teaching for me. It's just like, I don't know. I didn't even bother to reject it. I just never even noticed it. It was just irrelevant. And yet for him, it loomed very large and not appropriately. So what we need is we need to have it interpreted. And so even I sitting here interpreting, am a helpful adjunct. And one of the things that we have, which is absolutely marvelous in Ananda, is that we have spiritual family. And not only does our spiritual family exist, and you see, sometimes we all take these things for granted. We're swimming in the ocean and we don't even know we're in water. Our human relationships and our friendships, the way Swami Kriyananda has interpreted or has expressed Master's teaching, our relationships with each other are very important on the spiritual path. And in various places in the book that I wrote, Swami talks about friendship itself being one of the fundamental principles of Ananda, and even one of the fundamental purposes of Ananda, so that people can understand an uplifted way to love each other, because we all want to love each other. And I say this is not the given because there are many ashrams in which intimacy with other people, friendship with other people is what I mean, is not necessarily encouraged. Now, we're not encouraged to depend too much on each other because God is the sole reality. But part of the way we love and serve God is through each other. So even if the master is no longer in the body, we are not without embodiments of the guru. And even Swami writes in another place, the master is not pleased if you say, "I'll only listen to you," but refuse to listen to his other disciples, because that's how he reaches us. So the dilemma I've always faced in my life, though, even during the years when Swami was with us in the body, was that I had unique access. No, not unique access, but I had notable access. And not everyone did. Even people who shared the planet with him didn't necessarily have the same opportunities that were given to me. My way of dealing with them has always been to pass them on. But what I need to try to put across to people is it's the example that matters. And also now I feel the living vibration. But all of us who follow Master in this whole line of gurus never met any of them. So it's really just a question of how does God reach us, and how can God reach us? And I'm spending all this time on it because in the Bible it says, and it's a fundamental teaching, as many as received him. And actually, the first question that I'm going to deal with, which was sent to me in advance, deals precisely with this, which is, if we deeply believe that the masters and the great saints, and I put Swami in one or the other of those categories, can still reach us, then we have to be listening all the time. If you're in a room with someone who can talk, you listen. And so we have to, if we don't believe that the masters can talk to us, then there would be no reason why we would listen. But if we believe they can talk to us, we have to listen. And my experience has been when we expect God to speak to us, he talks a lot. And he talks through everyone. Swamiji tells a story which is very significant in itself. There was this woman that we all knew. This was in the 70s. And Swami, she was a lovely woman. She was generous, she was kind, she was fun. And she was just a little bit daft, just a little daft. She had a lot of goofy ideas about herself and her spirituality. One of them was she said to us, every so often I just, spontaneously just become invisible. And so if we're here and then suddenly you don't see me, don't be concerned. I'll come back. So we never actually saw her dematerialize at any point, but she very seriously wanted to warn us so that we wouldn't be alarmed. I mean, the human comedy is delightful. I mean, that became a joke among all of us that, oh, excuse me for a moment, I'm just going to turn invisible, I'll just be invisible now. But so she had her odd characteristics, and she came to visit Swamiji, came to visit Ananda, and we were hosting her because she was very fun, lovely lady. She insisted she had to have a private meeting with Swamiji. He was working on a book. He didn't want to be interrupted. I was his appointment secretary, so she had to get through me to get to him. And I was trying to follow his advice to me and protect his seclusion so he could write. She was very insistent. And I talked to Swami about it. And his first response was, no, I'm not, she said she had a special message for him that only it had to go straight into his ears. No, it couldn't go past me. No, she couldn't write it. She had to tell it. And Swami sort of, in a sweet way, but kind of rolls his eyes and says, what are the chances, like this. But then he said, whenever I become arrogant and think that someone can't teach me anything, he said, I'm always wrong. He said, so let her come and see me. And so we made an appointment. She talked to him for an hour. And afterwards, he said she really had a message for me. And it was important for the future of Ananda. It actually had to do with hard times and preparing ourselves for difficulties and various things. And he took it very seriously. So, lesson number 1, always keep your ears open and never assume. Yes, Hugh. Yes.
My microphone. Hello, Ma. It's such a blessing to see you. I met you at the Spiritual Renewal Week. You were kind enough to sign the book for me, which I have. I don't think to see the page where you signed it, but the point is, I just wanted to thank you because this was my ballast this summer. This was my counterpoint to the disease. And I think in the future, just like we have Buddha Bhais have meetings and they share, where were you or how did you come about the autobiography of Yogi? How did it come into your life? I think in the future, people will do the same with the book. And in my case, it was this summer. I was off. I worked as a teacher. I was off and I used my mornings for deep meditation. But then in the afternoon, the disease was everywhere. The news, people, it touched everybody's life. So what I did is in the evening, I read the book and I spent days, weeks just diving into the book. And let me tell you, it's perfect, Ma. I use the index fine. And I think that the power behind it, the power behind it is when we read the autobiography of Yogi, I read it many, many years ago, and you say, yes, self-realization, but then you read the stories of all those saints and you think, oh yeah, but there were saints, how am I ever going? It's almost like the myth of Sisyphus. You feel in your life, you keep pushing that rock up towards self-realization and it comes rolling back down. But then when you read this book, you see how somebody, a human being just like us, who suffered, who had addictions. I was just, I enjoyed reading how he was such a human being, how he struggled to get rid of smoking when he was young. He went to speakeasies in the 50s, and he was a human like us. Yeah, I love reading about all that and how he overcame these obstacles and disease to become a perfect disciple, a Hanuman figure for the West. And so I just want to thank you for that, because this is how I got through the summer, in a sane and in a better position, and I think a better disciple for Master.
Thank you. I mean, not thank you, but I'm extremely happy. I can't say thank you because I typed it. I didn't write it. I mean, I was there, but I dictated to
Thank you
me.
for being
No,
the
no,
channel.
it was my joy. I thank God for it. But I'm gonna pick up off of what you said, because this is sort of somebody was very specific with me um, on page. Let me just see. It was actually page 482 of the book, and the point in 482 was a second. My computer shifted here. Let me just think for a second. When I was writing this book, I didn't know how much of the SRF conflict, the conflict with SRF, I would have to put into it. By the time I was writing it, it was whatever 2016, 17, 18. The litigation ended in 2002, so on. I just didn't know how much I'd have to put into it. I started the book when I got the chronological cycle. I arrived in 71. In November of 72, Swamiji goes back to India for 10 years. I mean, goes back to India after an absence of 10 years. And in order to write anything in 1972, I'm like just starting the book. All of a sudden, this return trip to India, the experience in India, everything it meant, it doesn't make any sense unless we know what happened with Swami and SRF in 1962. So, like right at the beginning of the book, and really, I'm all alone in this little cabin in Washington, a state, and I'm working on this, and I finally, after years of effort, I finally really am writing. I know what I'm doing, and I'm doing it. And it was just like, oh no, like right now, in the very beginning, I'm going to have to just bring in this messy, unattractive story of Swami fighting with his guru bhais. But there was absolutely no choice. I couldn't finish the second year of my life with Swamiji without explaining it, because that was just what was happening. But of course, and then it's all the way through the book, and I went through very carefully, and I took out everything that was gratuitous. I only put in what was essential. But Swamiji's life, the life of a great saint, was constantly filled with obstacles. And of course, what happens, and it's happened with Master, and this is a great disservice actually that it's happened, is that out of devotion, disciples keep wanting to make their guru more and more perfect, and they want to just sort of push aside, and or they interpret whatever struggles he might have had, they interpret in such a way that it becomes legend and myth rather than something like you feel you're standing there. For example, at a certain point in Master's life, he went to Mexico. And it's presented, generally speaking, that he went on a vacation to Mexico. He did not go on a vacation to Mexico. He wiped the dust of Mount Washington off his feet and he fled to Mexico. And there was no certainty that he was coming back. I believe he'd been litigated against, he'd been betrayed, he'd been struggling with money. He was just sick of the whole darn thing and he didn't want to have anything to do with it anymore. I think it serves us better to know that even an avatar, when he assumes human life, lives human life. I put it like this. Many of you know Jai Ram, who's our friend who's been wrongfully imprisoned for the last 30 years. There's been this huge movement recently to help get him out of jail, which I hope we succeed in. I visited him a number of times when he was in deep, deep security, because maximum security in Folsom Prison, where he was for some decades. And I don't know if any of you have ever done that, but it's an experience. You have to go through so many levels of one gate opens, you step into a holding chamber, the other gate closes before this gate opens. By the time you finally get all the way in there, you're basically sitting in what looks like a high school cafeteria with a bunch of men and their families, and the whole drama of it is a little bit forgotten, except that there's armed guards around the walls who are always watching you, and the prisoners always have to be facing the guards. So there's a little bit of a reminder there. But in other words, there are very limited conditions as to what you can do. And I'm not convicted, rightfully or wrongfully. But when I'm inside that prison, there are extremely limited conditions in what I can do. And Jairam and all the prisoners, everybody has worked out a life, but it's within those rules. So Jairam himself, and he's a good example, he's not guilty of what he's in prison for. It's just a miscarriage of justice, but it doesn't matter because the conditions of life are still imposed upon you. So when an avatar or a Jivan Mukta or a great saint incarnates in a body, they might be innocent. Jesus called it without sin. You can say it without karma, but the conditions of the prison still apply. And they absorb the whole human consciousness, and they don't save themselves by breaking out of it. And so that's why the actual life, that it's not that they never meet obstacles or that they're never discouraged or that they're never exhausted by the effort, because that's prison life conditions. But how they deal with the prison life conditions is really where the lesson comes from. And so that's why the SRF part of Swami's life was so vital. But when Hugh was asking, saying that about how do I myself live, I was involved with the SRF litigation from the very beginning. It was just my karma to be part of that legal team. It was just, as things go. As a devotee, I've gotten to finish up little bits of karma or play out little bits of karma. Like being a lawyer is karma for me. I carrying a briefcase, and as I say, walking down a hall in shoes that click is kind of like something that I know about. So I got to play out my little road not taken by being an attorney. And so I was really in the middle of this for 12 years. Naidruva is my best friend, and we worked hard on it together. But for a lot of people in that situation, as we worked through and began to really understand what the SRF leaders were proposing and the tactics that they were willing to use in order to achieve it, for some people, it was a tremendous test of faith. And on that particular page of the book, which I think, as I said, is 492 or 482, whatever it was, it's 482. This was a particular moment with Swamiji, where it was proposed by one of the legal team members, basically saying, look, these women, and it was all women, met Master when they were teenagers. And they just put everything aside. They became nuns. They devoted themselves to their guru. We don't know the truth of their lives, but let's just say they never waffled sufficiently to ever step away from that way of life, to their dying breath, literally. They were absolutely devoted to Master. And yet, from our point of view, they have been profoundly misguided in what they have done, to the point where they are not speaking truth even in fundamental matters. And so one of the legal team members said, put it this way, what hope is there for me? And it was an extremely real question. If that kind of dedication can still be trapped in delusion. Now, what I found was so interesting was that I had exactly the same experience, weirdly. I spent more time with those great devotees of Master than almost any ordinary SRF member, all of it in terrible circumstances, but I know them personally better than most people who follow their lead. But what my response to it was, if even great souls like this can still get deluded, there's hope for all of us. Exactly the opposite, which is because I have a policy which I call reverse engineering, which of course is not an original phrase with me, but when I learned that phrase, I loved it. I first heard it in terms of the whatever the UFOs that supposedly crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, and among theories, and I'm not going to say it's true or not true, that there was a lot of advanced technology in these UFOs, and that a great deal of the inventions of our time came because engineers reversed engineered from the advanced technology of these crashed UFOs. It's a delightful story. I hope it's true because I love it. Okay, it could be true. But the reverse engineering is you see a reality in front of you, and you can either use that reality to diminish your faith, or you can try to figure out that maybe I have not quite understood. So when I see Dayamata, who inspires thousands and has lived an extraordinary life, and who is, in Swami's own words, a great disciple, most of the people at Ananda's reverence for Dayamata was created by the way Swami talked about her in his own autobiography, which caused a lot of problems when she was fighting us because everybody thought she was such a great soul. But I knew for a fact that almost no one knew anything about her except what Swami had told us. When I asked Swami, I said, "Why did you cut your own throat like that?" He said, "Well, because everything good about her," I said, "is also true." Just as simple as that. It's the truth. I have to say it. So the way Swami explains it on that page in the book, which is really interesting, is he said we have many chambers in our subconscious. It's a very interesting way to think about it. He said, and many of them can be absolutely clear, which is to say there's no more vrittis. But they're just because many of them are clear doesn't mean that everyone is clear. And just because there may be still a confusion in one area does not in any way diminish the greatness that is also perceivable. And see, and this is a terrible mistake that came out all through the 90s when Swami Kriyananda and every spiritual teacher in America was accused of sexual misconduct. And everybody said, well, that's it. You know, everything they taught us is a lie. Everything they purported to be is a lie, because Americans are pretty narrow-minded about sexuality, but that's part of it. But it's also true, first of all, well, I'm going to say something else about that, but it's also true that a person can have extraordinary greatness and then still have, a subconscious pocket that just needs to be resolved. But that doesn't make the greatness you see not valid. Now, on that page in the book, what also happened though is when that man presented that question to Swami, it actually caused a crisis of faith for Swamiji, because he was always struggling with reconciling how people he knew to be spiritually great, devoted to Master, could be so unalterably opposed to him. And of course, it caused him a great question in his own heart. Do they know Master's will better than I know Master's will? And that was, that's a very serious question. And also, when the question was raised like that, if he went from another angle, if these people who have been so devoted to Master can still behave in a way so contrary to his ideals, and then Swami said, maybe Master's not a true guru. Maybe this whole path doesn't work. And Swami was so unafraid of questions. And that's, of the countless lessons, and these are all the lessons in principle. Swami's interest was in truth. And if something that was very, very dangerous to his first premises was presented to him, most people would refuse to examine it. They would just find a way to block it. Just find a way to block it. I know of a marriage that was destroyed because the daughter was autistic. She just was. And the father could never go there. He could just never go there. And it became so impossible for the wife, the marriage just fell apart because he just couldn't face it. So here's Swami after 55 or 60 years of being Master's disciple, and the thought actually crosses his mind, is this path true? And it was an awful thought, but he needed to know the answer. because it just doesn't serve us. So he actually retired from our company for a few hours. Right, so it was probably overnight, but he just became exceedingly grave. And then when he emerged, his answer was, I don't know what this path has done for anyone else, but I know what it's done for me. And what he did was he took it out of dogma. He took it out of external proof and evidence. He took it out of things he couldn't possibly understand, like other people's reality. And he took it to my experience. At the end of the life of Jesus, when he was making it so hard on his disciples, eat my body, drink my blood. And in my translation of the Bible, I love it. It says, the disciples said one to another, this is a hard teaching. I absolutely love that. Can't you just see it? I mean, all of us, if I just told you now, all of you, need to go out and sell all that you possess and stand on the street with billboards, announcing this, you would say after I left the room, this is a hard teaching. And then the Bible says, from that time, many walked with him no more. And the way Master interprets that passage is that it wasn't a test of whether Jesus had lost his mind. It was a test of whether the disciples had faith in their own experience. Because Jesus knew the whole world was about to blow up around them, and he was going to be gone, and the only thing they would have is faith in their own experience. And if their relationship to Jesus was not deeply rooted in their own experience, they wouldn't be able to hold. And he knew that he needed a strong, unshakable core. So he was pushing them away. He wasn't rejecting them as disciples. He was just cleaning house for what was coming. So Swamiji did exactly the same thing. I know what I've experienced, and that's really all that I know, and I can build from that again. So you see, and then he said something else that was interesting. The greatness, and this is in regard also a little bit to what you said. The greatness of the path is not proven by those who fail on it. It's proven by those who succeed. And then he raised, two of the highest examples, which was Jnanamata and Rajasi. But if Master's path can produce one Rajasi and one Jnanamata, it says that it's not the path that's lacking, it's our ability to follow it. And I don't find our ability to follow it depressing, because as a conclusion, because I also do reverse engineering about myself. I started this in the 70s. I have a housemate now. Some of you have met him, Keshava. Keshava is he's what I call a 642. 642 is chapter 6, stanza 42 of the Bhagavad Gita, where Arjuna says to Krishna, what if I make an attempt at God realization and I fail? Krishna answers back, first of all, my devotee is never lost. But he also says, you'll be born to a house of yogis, which is a very auspicious birth, because such births are very hard to come by. So there are a few 642s within our community, and Keshava Betts happens to be one of them. All of this is to say, he's in his mid-20s. He's just the age I was, during my first decade at Ananda. So just in the course of conversation and being his friend, which is not a difficult thing to do, many memories of my 20s are coming back to me. I'm not going to tell you the specific one I was thinking about. I'm just going to leave it to your imagination. No, I'm not going to tell you. But I actually have been just trying to think, really trying hard to think, what could I have been thinking? What could I have been thinking? I just have no idea. It seems like it was just so crazy. Well, I'll give you one that was similar. Swami wanted to have an India fair. This is, these events that we would have, and he put me in charge of it. And somewhere along the line, I decided that, no, I don't think we're going to have it. But I never told him that I just wasn't going to do it. It's just we got closer and closer, and it just didn't happen. It was like sort of like 2 days before, finally, he must have known. He just let me play it out. But it's like, what could I have been thinking? I just changed it. For years afterwards. For somehow or another we worked it out. But it became monkey karma. This is how I put it to him. Whenever I think I'm safe, a monkey jumps out of the tree and falls on my back. Because whenever, just periodically, literally for years, Swami would just turn to me with this impish smile and would say, "How are plans going for the India fair, Asha?" Just like that, just to remind me of God knows what. But I think back and I think to myself, well, I was very sincere. I mean, I was completely sincere. I had no life but Ananda. I had no life at Ananda but Swamiji. I can't think of how I could have done more to show my commitment to the spiritual path than I was. And I behaved like an unconscionable idiot on like countless times, countless times. So I reverse engineer it. This must be what happens. When we're very sincere, this must be what happens. And I made up a little mantra, which is called, I am a sincere devotee. This is what has happened to me. This must be what happens to sincere devotees. And it doesn't always instantly solve the problem, but it certainly helps. And then I have a wonderful example of Dayamata, who I can't imagine, someone with greater devotion to Master, who, and God forgive me if I'm wrong, in my humble opinion, lost her judgment around Swami Kriyananda. And there you have it. Swami himself said, she'll get over it because she's a great soul. Great souls get over their faults. And it was all divinely inspired. But there you are. Because I have seen also, and I've also seen it from Swami Kriyananda. Let me think how to say it. He had his moments. He definitely had his moments. He wasn't like always cheerful. He wasn't always lighthearted. He wasn't always effortlessly victorious. That's what I'm trying to say. He was always victorious, but he wasn't effortlessly victorious, and he wasn't instantaneously victorious. But it also gave me a definition of victory. And victory is perseverance. That, okay, today's a bad day, tomorrow will be better. Okay, tomorrow doesn't turn out to be so good, but there's always the day after. And it's just this, we're inside this prison, but we will get out of it. The guards are having a hissy fit. The food is really terrible today. I got thrown into solitary. There's a rat in my cell. Just like make a list. It's all there. These are prison conditions, and prison conditions include mental and emotional. But once again, what I said earlier, Swamiji was never afraid of the truth. And the truth included his own response to things. And he didn't comfort himself with untruth. He persevered until he'd found a divine answer that would liberate him from what he was going through. Does that make sense? Because it's a very, very important point. Yes, Supriya.
So along what you were just saying, a comment came into the chat box I'd like to read. And there's another one off topic that we'll read later. But this one says, that's like when Master was talking to Swami and Lori Pratt about the story of his bagging all the stray dogs in Ranchi, India, which Swami understood and Lori didn't, to give Swami faith in his own experience of Master.
That's a very good example, and I do include that. And Swami himself, this was the question that Eric asked me, among others, was how did the things that Swami say affect you? And there is a reality, and I actually think it's an ongoing reality in the sense that Swami or Master will speak to you through a recording or through a book. And even though it might not be someone standing in front of you saying something to you, like I commented about Swami's comment about the index, how it just stayed in my mind for so long. And I've observed that things that I've read of masters or heard of masters, certain ones will stick with me. And sometimes they won't turn out to be relevant for a long, long time. But then all of a sudden, I will come to a certain understanding and I'll realize it's already been articulated for me. And that story of, that incident, one of the few times or the only time that Tara and Swami and Master were all together, and how Swami was given an experience that he didn't understand for a long, long time. Yeah, very interesting. Very, very. Why don't we take a moment and let's have a little chant, one chant, and then we'll have just a very brief meditation, and then we can maybe start with the question that's in the chat box or more that I have here. Okay, let's do that.